Hey, Comics Cubers, it's time for our annual tradition, interviewing Zander Cannon in November. Usually we do it a little earlier, but because of current events, we postponed it a little bit. But here you go. Don't forget, if you're feeling generous and you like the Comics Cube, please do subscribe to our Patreon.
Yeah,
How are you?
I love it. I'm great. Well, all things considered, I'm fine. I'm great.
I know the thing is, when I first interviewed you, it was on a November 5, and then I interviewed you and Gene, and as it turned out, we also scheduled it on a November 5. Obviously, this year, some things might have been happening on the 5th of November.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think someone bombed Parliament. Is that what it was? Oh no, that's a while back.
That was a
Yeah,
while back, but it's an apt date
yeah,
for all of
right,
that.
right.
In the year since we last talked, what you been up to?
Well, I've been at first I was like, okay, I've just finished, Kaijumax. I finished this six volume, mega world, and and was living, breathing, eating, drinking, and sleeping kaiju, and I was really relieved to sort of let a lot of that go. Like, yeah, I'll go see Godzilla minus one, but I don't have to see it opening night or whatever. And so I did a lot of short stories. I did a lot of stuff for anthologies for like 2000 AD and for
Boy,
Xeno, which was the Oni Press anthology, and I did
you and
just
Gene did one for Ahoy Comics, right?
and Gene and I did one for Ahoy Comics. That was pretty fun. Yeah, the cryptid miniseries. Yeah, and did a cover for the Toxic Avenger that Ahoy was putting out as well. So that I don't think that covers have been out yet, but anyway, yeah.
I'm
So it was nice to do short stories, and short projects.
You mentioned the Toxic Avenger, and I'm surprised that there is a Toxic
Or
Avenger comic coming out in 2024.
well, Matt Bors, who you
Yeah.
may know from the Nib, he was like a huge Toxic Avenger fan, and he just went up and talked to Lloyd Kaufman at Comic-Con and just did the deal like on the day and took it to Ahoy where they had been publishing Justice Warriors and stuff. So I mean, it was all him, he just figured it out and got it done. So
That's
and I was
that
like,
that's the
yeah.
kind of energy we need to take into our lives
I
moving
know
forward.
I was trying to manifest some of that too because I was like, well, I know Matt and I know Tom Pyre and I know like I know all the people at Ahoy, so I'm like, well, I'm gonna do a cover for this. So so I was kind of yeah, I was like, oh, that's a good energy to take into 2025. I think.
We need good energy going into 2025.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you do
we
you
do.
have Yeah, go ahead.
We gotta find it where we can get it.
Do you have a particular licensed property or IP that you would love to revive, much like the Toxic Avenger?
Oh gosh, I mean, I did a Star Trek comic way back, and I always really thought that those were fun. I mean, not that that needs reviving; they do it all the time. But um, yeah, I don't know. Like, it'd be fun to do. It'd be fun to do anything that sort of like would allow a visual style change. I don't know. I don't know. It would be fun to do a team. Like an absurd over the top A-team comic. But I mean, I also think, all that stuff's kind of had its day. We can come up with new stuff, I think. But
Right. That's what I'm surprised by. Like, I see the stands now, and there's like so much stuff from, there's so many remakes.
yeah.
Like, this is 80s cartoon called Sectors that I don't think anyone even watched.
But it had the little glove creature that you had the guy sit on top of. Blah, 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 blah.
Right. Like, what? How is this now a comic?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was in the 80s too. I mean,
That's
you
true.
know, I think I remember seeing ads for it because Marvel had that Star imprint.
Yeah.
Um, and that was all like the Care Bears and stuff
The,
like that. But it also
the
had
Thundercats. Yeah.
Peter Porker Spectacular Spider-Ham, which was absolutely one of my favorites. Like that was so I saw all the Star ads in the back. So
How has Marvel not tapped you to do Peter Porker the Spectacular Spider-Ham yet?
I mean, yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I would do the hell out of Peter Porker. I mean, it was so great. I loved that it had a whole bunch of different art styles on it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like Um, yeah. Fred Hendeck did some. I think that was pretty amazing. So
I'm just saying you'd be a hand and glove fit. Uh,
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Well, all right. I'll just I'll walk through the front doors. Just like my boomer parents would say. Like just walk through the front doors, show some confidence, give them a firm handshake and look them in the eye and say, "I'll draw some Peter Porker's Spectacular Spider-Ham comics."
yeah, some people still give me that kind of advice when it comes to career stuff. It's like
Really?
just go into the office and like talk to someone. I was like, they have security now
Yeah, that's right. They see me coming.
and reception and
Yeah.
a whole thing with like turnstiles and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I get it's like I mean, again, I like the energy. I like the idea, but it's like it doesn't take that form anymore. Like you have to, you know, you have to talk to people in the acceptable locales. They don't want to be ambushed in the physical space of the office, you know?
Yeah. So you talked about before we went on the air, you talked about you have a comic coming out for Image and you're switching genres.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
What am I doing? I don't know. I mean, yeah, I can't be tied down. I think that everything I do is in my own wheelhouse, like it's people are like, "Oh, I expect it to be this because it's this genre." I'd be like, "Nah, I'm bringing a bunch more sad. It's more, like it's more gruesome." Well, I'm doing a horror title that's called Sleep. It hasn't even been solicited yet, so I mean, here's some inside baseball deets here. But yeah, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde type of horror story where with this young man, when he falls asleep, he turns into something unbelievably terrifying. But every issue is just his waking hours. And so somebody was like, "Oh, like the Hangover," and I'm like, "Sorta." I'm not going to lead with that, but yeah, like sorta. And so he has to figure out, it's a mystery in that way, but it's also there's a narrative outside of that, and it's all done in black and white, so that's another departure. Not black and white, black, white, and gray. And then
Yeah.
there's red pops that are not the gore. They're basically the lore and the details that there's a lot of mystery to sort of like patch together by sort of like taking note of what's red and what's uh in what orientation things are and so forth. So yeah, it's fun. It's like all my the stuff that I would do to put like gags and jokes in the background. I'm like putting details and story in the backgrounds with it's that part of my brain that's in overdrive at all times.
So it
So
would be like it's like if we read Dr. Jekyll, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but only the Jekyll parts.
only the Jekyll parts, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and believe me, it'll have plenty of gruesome gore and stuff like that, and it'll be very upsetting.
I am sold.
Yeah. Okay.
I love Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, me too. And I think I think it's fun. I like a story where I mean, what do you call it? The unreliable narrator but it's also just like you're not given enough information, or you're not giving as much information as maybe you'd like at every moment, and so you kind of have to piece things together. I really enjoy that. So. And it's fun to play with a world that's much more grounded. Like, there's other than the sort of like premise, it's a world like ours, And in fact, I'm basing it on the town that I went to college in, and
Oh,
in the '90s, because you got to set it in the '90s, because otherwise cell phones and phone cameras would kind of ruin everything.
I feel like we're gonna see a lot more of that kind of stuff. It's like, oh,
I
we got to
think
set it in the
so.
'90s.
I think that that's a transition point for like things like horror and things like because it's like you can only do so many things where it's like, oh, the ghost is in the machine or whatever. Sometimes you just need to take out all of that convenience
Yeah,
and sort of like panopticon stuff. So
yeah. It's like horror and noir stuff, like mystery stuff,
yeah,
especially.
yeah.
Like I feel like you just can't do cell phones.
Right. I mean, when they were first coming out and people were doing a modern day, like in the early 2000s, people were like doing these modern day noirs, and they were always in places where it's like, oh, no service, no service. Like I feel like that insert shot of like the phone that said no service was just like a cliche for like 5 years. And now they have to figure out other ways around it because we know there's almost no places with no service.
Yeah, no, like I'm a big fan of Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips,
Mm,
and
hmm.
like every single one of their books now is set before the smartphone because of course it is. They can't do it.
Right. Well, and I think so, and I think even beyond that, like uh, having smartphones in your story instantly makes everything so much less visually interesting because it's like, well, this guy's got to wait for his contact to show up. And it's like, oh, it's the 90s. Well, he's smoking a cigarette or he's like looking at a newspaper. He's walking around. He's looking in. But after cell phones, it's like, well, he's just, like texting people or looking at Twitter or Blue Sky now. I think everybody's gone to Blue Sky.
Yeah.
But but anyway, yeah, like I think that it suddenly that becomes a very visually uninteresting thing where everybody's defaulting to looking at the little black square.
Is it
Um,
hard? Is it hard to write a mystery in a comic book?
I think well, and I've given myself all kinds of limitations, but yeah, like I don't. I think it's nice because you can put things in the backgrounds that are like very small, and if you're reading the comic fast, you'll miss them. But you can also control how fast you read the comic, so it's kind of nice to be able to put things that are pretty subtle in the background, and know that people can kind of can go back a page and go, "What was that again?" So I kind of like that. I like that you can really use sort of that the big empty background that's meant to give a sense of depth or whatever, but also can have a lot of actual story detail in it. I think it's great. I think it's maybe an ideal way to tell a mystery.
If
Um,
you're putting a lot of detail in the background, I'm just getting technical now. Like
yeah, yeah.
like if you're putting a lot of detail in the background, being that it is a comic, um, would highlighting a red herring be way too? Would it be cheating too much? Because I feel like if you were reading a novel and there was all of a sudden like a red herring somewhere in the prose, it's okay because there's like so much other stuff going on in the prose.
Oh, like, to try to like trick people or lead them astray, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like I think it all depends on what you've set up, and I think I mean the way that I'm doing it, where things are red, I'm trying not to do anything that's like incorrect, is red. It's just sort of like they don't really mean anything in isolation is my plan, and so I think that yeah, I mean I think that in any medium you can only trick people for so long, and you can only trick people for so long before it's unfair, before you're just sort of like, oh, this is messing with people, you know. And I also think I want to make things that people can guess, like
yeah.
you don't want I'm not big enough where it's like, oh, if I made it too easy to guess, then people would guess it and I'd have to change it because then the ending was spoiled. But it's like if only I had that problem that I was so big that 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 like there would be like this talk on the internet about it. But I feel like four people guess it. Great, good job, guys. You get a no prize in the mail.
But
I
also
mean,
if people guess it, that means they were paying attention.
that means that they are paying attention, and it means that it was fair. Like I didn't do any tricks. I said, yeah, yeah, it's you figured it out, and hopefully, I mean, it isn't a puzzle, and so if you figure it out, that should hopefully just be very satisfying when you read the ending. You're like, nailed it, and also, it has the ending of a story and the whatever the catharsis
Yeah.
of the narrative and so forth. But so yeah, I don't I think it's too bad when people rely too much on puzzles and have the puzzle be the only important thing. Like I kind of I liked that, say the From Hell, like tells you who the murderer is from panel one, like the whole time, and of course it doesn't advertise itself as a mystery either. The movie does,
The
but
movie
like
does.
yeah. But I think that it's far more haunting and gruesome that you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to see how like the police can't seem to figure out who this guy is, and once they find him, they kind of go, he's untouchable or whatever.
Well, the
Spoilers.
The movie's also in a weird spot where it was like, gee, I wonder if it's the other big name actor in this movie who's not doing anything.
Right, right. It's just standing around. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
We introduce him early, and he's not doing anything for the first 40 minutes or so.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, either somebody who always plays villains or is, or is like this actor whose talents are being wasted for the first, 80% of the movie.
or
So,
or an actor who would then best be known as a seemingly nice guy who might be easily corrupted, say by
yeah.
a ring.
Yeah, right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, it was Ian Holm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, or Ash in Alien and or, anyway, yeah. I couldn't
Um,
remember if it was Ian Holm or Derek Jacobi,
it
but
was Ian Holm. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How many issues is it going to be?
Six at the beginning to get the first narrative out of the way. And I mean, like all comics, like that's a complete story, but like all comics, there's, it's like there's more to come if if there's interest, if there's sales. Once I really kick in my internet marketing plans.
Are you going to do another six batches of six issues?
Oh God, no. I mean, probably never. I mean, that was really fun, but I also think not I mean, if I were being paid, a handsome wage, sure, but I think in comics it's like I kind of enjoy comics being their own, kind of being a shorter thing, that you can put it into two volumes or one massive volume and then kind of move on to the next thing. Especially when I mean, this is so grotesque to even say out loud, but I mean, part of your sort of like business plan as sort of a creator is to say like to have all this IP that then somebody at Apple TV says, you know what? We'd love to pay you, a couple $10,000 for this option for a couple, and if you have a couple things and you do it over a couple of years, it's like, well, that starts to sort of fill in, kind of backfill some of your earning potential. And that's not exactly being a purist, but sometimes it's better to have that than to have like, Kaijumax, where it's like, oh, people pass on Kaijumax. It's like, well, that was a 10 or that was a 7-year project that, you know, well, I don't have anything else in that time. I'm a writer artist, it's like I only do one thing at a time. So,
What? Why do people pass like Kaijumax? Do you ever get a reason? Is it too expensive?
oh no. I mean, it would be animated. It would be the same cost as
Yeah.
anything else. I no, I mean, of course we had always sort of joked about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we made all the suits? It's like, yeah, I mean, they're not no one's gonna do that. That's crazy. Even though it would be awesome. I'd love it.
It
But
would be awesome.
or even computer animated to look like their suits. Whatever, that would be cool. But
Didn't you
like
design the Kaijumax character so that it could be playable by people in suits?
I mean, sort of. Like that wasn't the reason why, but yeah, like that was my aesthetic, which is just like, oh yeah, it's supposed to be kind of a dumpy looking weird thing that some person, some stuntman or stuntwoman is in there. Yeah, for sure. But no, I guess I think people passed on it, and this is all as of 2019 was the last time we really pitched it around,
Yeah.
and I think that at the time it was like there was a lot of when people were sort of like they first hear about it they go, oh well, we'd love to have a kaiju IP that could compete with whatever the legendary Godzilla stuff or Toho stuff or anything else like that. And it's like I don't know if you're ready for what this is. Like this is not that. Like this is sort of like the terminal point of all that monster movies, all these sort of like earnest monster movies. It's like we have to get to this to get to this point, we have to kind of be like a little bit sick of monster movies where they're like, yeah, there's a lot of tropes and they kind of are all kind of about the same thing. And now let's take all those tropes and then transpose them into
Right.
this crime drama, and have it be ironic and have it be with a wink at all times. I think that kind of that was not happening then. I don't know if it's happening now. I think, and that was part of my attitude even then was kind of like maybe we just have to wait. Maybe we have to wait until the world is sort of like sick of monsters and then they want to do something that is like, kind of puts the nail in the coffin. Like is the it's like well, just the way that Alan Moore and Frank Miller felt like they were doing with superheroes in 1986, where it's like they'd kind of run their course, and so like here's the autopsy in Watchmen, and here's the brass band funeral in
Dark
Dark
Knight.
Knight Returns, and that's the and that's the end of superheroes. I mean, or rather, that's the thing that you read, the last superhero thing that you read before you kind of grow up, or whatever, like before your last night in the nursery. I mean, not that you can't, but I mean, just that sort of like that's the last time superheroes are going to be truly, relevant to you is kind of when you're 15, 16, 17 years old, and then you can kind of move on to other stuff.
Yeah,
Same thing with Kaijumax. It's like, well, this is the thing where it's like, hey, remember how you watched all those things? Here are all those tropes switched around and turned upside down and made into something that's a completely different story, and you know,
it,
uh,
it's
then you can move on.
interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned Watchmen because when you were describing what Kaiju Max would be in relation to Kaiju, I thought like, well, that's exactly how I felt about the movie Watchmen. Like, regardless of how I felt about the technical execution of the movie Watchmen, I didn't like it. But
Yeah.
um
If
I
I'd seen
thought
a if I'd seen a highlight reel, I would have been like, great. But then I didn't need to see the rest of it.
but I thought regardless of the execution of it, it just came out at the wrong time too.
Uh-huh.
Like like you can't end superhero movies when barely any have been out.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
when Ghost Rider or Fantastic Four counts as a decent one.
Meow.
I think
Um,
it's I think
no, for sure.
Fantastic Four is actually a pretty fun movie.
No, for sure. I mean, whatever. Like, I think that it would be interesting if somebody, and I think it's probably all in the works too. And I mean, Deadpool and Wolverine is almost kind of like that sort of
Right.
thing for superhero movies, where it's like, okay, let's take all the stuff from superhero movies, not from superhero comics, but from superhero movies, and sort of yeah, make this sort of terminal point of like here are all the jokes, here's flipping everything around, here's making everything ironic or with a wink, and I mean, anyway,
Right. I think
I
I think you will eventually get there with kaiju stuff.
yeah, I mean, if and part of this is, and I don't, this seems very cynical to say, and I don't want so I don't think of myself as being a particularly cynical person, but I mean, part of it was like if somebody just said, "We'll pay you $10,000 a year to never make it into a TV show," I've been like, I don't know, maybe, like it being a TV show is not that important to me. It's neat. It would be cool, and I think that you could add something. I think you could really do something interesting with it. But I also felt like I'm locked into comics. I'm not going to move to LA and run a writer's room for a TV show. That doesn't sound fun to me. That doesn't sound fun for my family. That doesn't. So like I sort of think like if I could just sort of make enough money as a comic book artist, I wouldn't even give that stuff a second thought, because comics are the thing that I love, and I love movies too, and I love video games, but I don't do those things.
Yeah, you make comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, but nobody can fault you for if you want more money.
No,
Yeah,
you better not. I
like
mean, come on, man. I'm
I mean,
struggling
we
here.
need to live. We need to live.
I know. It's just so anyway, yeah. I mean, my wife makes the big bucks as a public school teacher. So we're hanging in there.
Uh, so getting back to sleep, are you changing your art style for it?
Just to a degree. I mean, certainly the scale is small, like um but I mean it's in black and white, and I'll give you some images so that you can pop them up if you want. And
Great.
it's in black and white and grayscale. And so one of the things that was kind of interesting was like, oh, I don't have to think about what color this person's t-shirt is because it doesn't matter, what color this t-shirt is. It's just everything is basically light, how it's like, oh, this is like hot light on somebody, but this is sort of a bounce light from the background, and I can really focus on that. I did it in Kaijumax too, but it was, but that was much more about the colors, and this is much more about how does light interact with shapes, bodies, and stuff like that. And then and but keep everything really sort of like toned down so that these red things can pop out and become and really be noticeable and go like, why the heck is that, that whatever those scissors in the background, why are those red? That kind of stuff. So that you really notice them when even when you don't know what the heck is going on. But yeah, it was I mean it was really kind of interesting too to kind of like everything that I was looking at reference for in Kaijumax was like, well, what does the city look like from overhead, and what does this destroyed building look like if if something smashed into it, or here's some hurricane devastation that I can sort of use reference for. And this is much more like, well, what does a coffee shop look like in the 90s? What is this small, how's this small town laid out? What's in a park? Like what, I don't know, a bunch of really ordinary stuff that it's kind of like I'd never thought about sort of the granularity of like ordinary things and how to draw them. And it's just as fun in a way. I mean, it's not as kooky, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There would be like a rock in the background with a plaque on it that says this is the name of this park, and like, ooh, there's a little clue in there or whatever. Like it's a fun sort of like a different approach that in a way is it's like all the things that I loved about Kaijumax I can kind of transpose onto this sort of like more down to earth, this more grounded story. Just have to trick them out a little bit.
You had ostensibly a main character in Kaijumax, which was Electrogore.
Yeah,
But really, the whole book ended up being an ensemble piece. Sometimes you'd go for stretches where Electrogore would barely show up.
yeah.
Is it nice getting to a book where you're focused specifically on a main character?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, and it's interesting because it's like it's also I'm shackled to this character because it's all about their experiences. So it doesn't cut to anyone else. It just follows him around, and so I have to kind of do a lot of things like, well, there's a shot where there's a page where he's opening up he's late to work and he has to open up this coffee shop, and so I have to do all these like really fast cuts. I mean, they're just small panels that are all kind of like punctuated by a sound effect that really sort of like makes that like skips us through, a 10 minutes or something like that, so that we don't have to kind of, we don't have to just like drag ourselves along with this poor sucker, in his life. And so, yeah, that's kind of that's an interesting approach, and I think that it's nice because then, like you say, I'm not really changing my art style because I can only really draw one way, especially since I'm not really changing tools. It's still digital. I'm still drawing it digitally. I'm still lettering it by hand on a screen, and and um, and even though it's black and white, it's like my art style is still kind of the same, and still everything's just a little bit sort of idiosyncratic and kooky. And so I think that highlights all the little things like sticking with one character, not having any color, having all the details in the background be lore based instead of joke based. So I like to keep some things the same while I have to keep my art style the same, so I make everything else about it different.
Must be nice to have the background stuff, not have to reference something
Yeah,
every
yeah,
single time.
right, right. And it is funny too because sometimes there's a compulsion where I'm like, this background has nothing. And so I'm like, all right, let's see what's in the background. What can I make red? What can I? And so like the lore in my head is solid, but it's also like there's a little bit of air in there so that I can kind of add in a few things because I never want it to be I never want reading the book to be a boring slog. You know what I mean? I mean
Mhm.
that's comics for you. You want it to be exciting. I mean, I'm a little nervous already that it's like it's a slow burn of a story, but but you kind of hope that people would cut me a little slack where there's like, hopefully people know me as a guy who does good comics.
Yes. You've shown up here 4 years in a row.
That's right. That's right. You wouldn't do that if my comic started went off a cliff, you know?
I've been a fan of yours since 2000,
Wow.
maybe
Jeez.
earlier. I don't know.
Wow. That's coming up on a quarter century.
Hell yeah.
Good God.
Maybe actually earlier. I don't actually remember when this stuff came out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, top 10 came out in 99, if that was the
Oh,
if that was
well,
the
there you
one.
go.
Yeah. Wow.
Regarding, regarding you're talking about light and shadow, right? Because I'm interested in this because I was looking at some recolorings of Marvel stuff,
Mm.
and there's a particular type of recoloring they do on Jack Kirby art where
Mm.
they try to color him three-dimensionally, except it's,
Right, right. Yeah, like there's the gradients within the shape.
yeah, there's gradients within the one shape.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, because of the cartoonishness of your style, is it what are the specific challenges when it comes to choosing the lighting and the coloring and the gradients?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an the artist Adam Warren
Yeah.
who does Empowered. I always felt like he always did a sort of like a simplified version that was kind of like animation, where or what we think of as 2D animation, up until Toy Story took over. But like the idea that like figures can have kind of hard line to sort of distinguish between the light and dark side. Um, just because it creates a fast read, so this person feels alive and feels like they're moving around instead of like a statue. You might render out that line between light and dark so that you kind of feel like so that your eye can kind of has a lot to look at and slows everything down. I mean, there's probably the science to this, but I don't know what it is. Whereas then in the background, even so, I still kind of keep hard lines on things just because I feel like, we've only got so much time. But also then you can start doing things in the sky or underneath a lamp where you've got this light gradient that can sort of like bloom outward. And that gives you a nice sense of like the background, the ground receding behind you, the sky feeling like sort of an endless expanse rather than a flat, a flat plane. So I think that if I like being judicious about gradients. I never would really apply a gradient to a shape of something that's alive. I don't feel like that's worth it. I generally, if I have a gradient on something, it's mainly because, oh, they're stepping into darkness and sort of like darkness is sort of like a shroud over them, and it's less so on, it's like a bounce light from the ground is making the bottom half a little bit lighter or something like that. But I do feel like there's something about like things that are alive, things that are moving, need to feel a little bit like more cartoony because if you render them too realistically, I think they deaden down on the page. That makes am I
I agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm making up words here, but what like that's the idea. Like, and if something's moving in the background, I kind of, I might give it uh like a little white halo, so that you kind of see like, oh yeah, like this is something that's moving, and so the background, those background lines aren't going to just like touch their head, like you want to really show that they're moving.
By and large, and this is not always, by and large, and this is not always, I do think that when it comes to comics, whenever somebody goes into straight up, like the more realistic somebody goes, we sacrifice a little bit of movement
Hmm.
and vice versa.
Yeah. And I think that you can talk about like like sort of the gold standard of that kind of stuff, like Alex Ross. I mean, not everything that Alex Ross is like my taste, but like he does such a good job, I think, of saying like this is something that is very clearly color or that is very clearly photo referenced or or drawn from life. But it's like, but the lighting on the side of their face is so stark and is sort of like so defined as a shape that it cuts through a lot of that sort of like deadening uh feeling that photo reference can have. And so I mean, I'm always stunned at how well those work as comics. There's a strength and there's a power and there's a freedom of movement to it that is always kind of a little bit stunning to me because so many people when they draw things from life, it kind of looks like a photo play and it can be a little bit dull. But
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to say about, I could be the 100 millionth person to say that Alex Ross is a good artist, so
No, Alex Ross was the exception I was thinking of too.
yeah. Yeah.
From the thing that I said, but like I was,
I mean, Gene Ha too. Like, I mean, his stuff is, I mean, you don't have to. You might not be surprised to find this out, but I really love Gene Ha. I think he's a wonderful guy and
Really?
a great artist. Yeah, can you believe it? But yeah, I mean, like again, it's like you have to figure out what you use to sort of give people a fast read, what you have to do to make things look realistic, what you have to do to make things look realistic enough,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It's a whole balancing act.
Yeah, I think my biggest examples for what I just said is a lot of it is actually like newspaper strips.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh,
like
like Alex Raymond and stuff.
well, I was thinking of like Mark Trail, right?
Oh, okay, sure.
Mark Trail and Mary Worth, like
Yeah,
they're anatomically correct, but
yeah,
they don't
right.
move as much as say, Peanuts.
Sure, sure. And I mean, yeah, and they're, they're human size, so you have to cut in close because their heads aren't, grotesquely huge like peanuts. And so yeah. I mean, and I think well, I mean, I think those strips are great for what they are. I think they're
Yeah,
really, they are really sort of clever in the way that they sort of use space and figure out a way to tell the story compellingly over the course of years,
yeah.
decades.
Well, the other one I was thinking of was Hal Foster, who they're
Well,
very
yeah.
pretty.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, so I recently, when my son was little, we would sometimes read comics in bed, and like one of the favorite ones that we read actually was um these Flash Gordon
Alex Raymond.
Sunday strips. Yeah. And I mean, especially because it wasn't always like this, but I mean, they're almost all narrated with captions instead of word balloons. So it'll even say Flash declares defiantly, "You'll never win, Ming," or and runs down the corridor. Like it just is explaining what's happening in this drawing. But the drawings are very, very photo referenced, very detailed. They don't have that sort of like Bern Hogarth,
Yeah.
heroic, heroic proportions and stretching. They look like, whoever his model was for Flash Gordon, probably himself, was just sort of like a guy who's in shape, like, and when he's running down the corridor, it's not particularly sort of like stretched out to sort of like give the impression of running. It's very sort of like staid and you know, I don't know, like mature, I think is the what they were going for was a sort of like maturity of sort of like a classically composed image.
Yeah, like
Um,
we can draw as well as anyone.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, so I think that I mean, I actually really like those strips because of that. Like, I don't feel like they would have been better if they were more dynamic.
hmm.
I think that they're kind of funny or not funny, but it's just a fun, continual sort of story that can focus on maybe the wonder of it because it's like, oh, like, and the sky of Mongo filled with, these sort of retro future spaceships, and you're like, yeah, that's great.
That's great.
Doesn't have to make my heart pound to go like, that's really cool.
Uh, Aside from the premise, what can you tell us about the protagonist of Sleep?
Well, it's like an extreme version of me as a 22-year-old, where like in the plot, sort of the demands of the plot and sort of who he is. He's like a devout Christian, which I'm not and was not, but there's a hellish sort of like cast to all the other stuff. So I kind of wanted to give him a big contrast. But it's basically somebody who is a little bit overwhelmed by life and a little bit sort of can be sort of numb day to day and never wants to harm anyone, never wants to sort of like hurt anyone's feelings, never wants to do anything. It's sort of like this, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink type of kind of goody two shoes. And so yeah, I wanted to give that personality to somebody who then finds that they're responsible for dozens of murders. And like, I mean that's all my dreams, where I always like, oh, I had a big long dream last night where they told me that I had murdered a bunch of people and now I'm going to prison for it. And I'd be like, huh, what an interesting thing to spend the whole night thinking about.
Huh. Have you seen a therapist?
Yeah. What do you think all these comics are? I mean, it's just I'm forcing everybody to go through my therapy with me.
That's great. What about the other characters?
Yeah, so what I wanted to do from like I think that there's a lot of sometimes you create characters where you're like, oh, I knew a character, I knew a person like this. And I sometimes try to create my characters from kind of a pragmatic point of view where this is everything is kind of like centered around this church. And so I wanted to have a character who is sort of like who treats, like the main character treats the church as something that shows him morality and goodness. I have another character sort of like the church shows her sort of like knowledge and sort of understanding. And then another person who's the church shows them sort of like a hierarchy and like a power. And so anyway, there's his sort of friend named Tabitha, who's sort of like she's a biochemist who works at a nearby lab, and then a friend of his from high school he hasn't seen in a while, who is sort of a Christian singer songwriter who kind of was kicked out of his band because of things that haven't, like suspicious situations. And so yeah, and then of course there's 1,000 other characters in this town, the person who owns the coffee shop and the, other police officers, people that the main character and his friend went to high school with and have history with. And so yeah, it's meant to be a very sort of like an examination of living in a small town and everybody knows everybody, but how
Mm.
much do you really know everybody type of thing. Um, in a hot town where tragedy struck, 5, 6 years before, and everybody is kind of hasn't quite dealt with it yet. So that might come into play. I don't know. It's just, it's how comics are. You just seed in a little thing here and there. Oh, I don't know. Should this terrible tragedy that everybody's reeling from, will that impact this horror story? Probably.
Could they be tied together?
I don't know. I mean, like who's to say? Who's to say, really? I mean,
Maybe the
I'm
creator of the book is to say.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny because doing something like this, doing something that's like a single premise. Like I always think of like there's a tipping point in every premise where you're like, okay, this story is about X. Like if you're making Back to the Future, it's like, okay, well, Back to the Future is about time travel, and like that's the only premise because it's like you don't want to get halfway through that movie and be like, and there's vampires, like it would really ruin what that movie was going to be. I mean, time traveling vampires, that's a whole different thing. And if you're doing time traveling vampires, then you can start throwing in all kinds of stuff. Well, there's probably werewolves too, and there's probably like, maybe we're in a simulation or whatever. Uh, but Kaijumax was one of those where it's like there's 1,000 things, like everything that has to do with kaiju creatures or giant robots or aliens, we can all throw it in there. There's nothing that's kind of off limits. Whereas with this thing, it's like, well, there's really only one premise, and I can't really escape from it. And so in addition to like sticking with the main character at all times, it's like I kind of can't bring in anything else to sort of like make a scene work. So it all depends on sort of looking inward and making sure that like, okay, well, these things are happening. How is everyone reacting to it? And trying to make sure that the story is small enough that you notice people's like a change in someone's attitude. Whereas in Kaiju Max, that would be too subtle for, all the crazy stuff that was happening at all times.
Did you live in a small town? I'd always been under the impression that you've been in
No, not no,
Minnesota.
but I went to
Yeah.
college in a small town. So it's
Uh,
based on the where I went to college. I went to Grinnell College in Iowa, in Grinnell, Iowa, which is, a town of about what 8,000 people, and the school was 1,300 of those people.
is it one of those places where the school is the main attraction of the town?
Kinda, but also held in contempt because it's a bunch of weirdos, like it was,
Uh,
like it was all the kids with blue hair and pronouns before any of that stuff was really happening, right? So like we were like, if they clocked us as one of the college students in town, it was like it's not like it wasn't love and flowers or anything. Like so I mean yeah, I mean I was sort of again, this kid in this story is not really meant to be me. It's just it's a version of sort of like a young person who is trying to be as kind as possible, which is how I considered myself, but like, but I'm taking it to an extreme degree.
I grew
Um,
up in Manila and I went to college in a small town in the States, so I feel like I would very much relate to the story as well.
I should think so. I should think so. Yeah, well, yeah, send it your way.
uh, and then if what else are you working on right now?
Gene, uh, Gene every once in a while has some stuff that he wants me to do layouts on. I mean, I'm lettering. I letter May, of course, every
Yeah.
Gene Ha's book, May. I and I'm always talking to people like, I'd love to do this cover. I'd love to do this short story. I'd love to do this, illustration. I mean, and it's like at a certain point, it's like I know every editor because they've all kind of moved around, and it's like, oh, you were the assistant editor at DC, and now you're the editor in chief at such and such, or this, and so it's nice to sort of have a person where it's like, oh, I've got an email for this person, and I can kind of say, I'd love to be able to do a 5-page story. I'd love to do a cover. I'd love to write a thing or two, you know, that kind of stuff. I've been doing commissions. That's kind of nice to be able to you know, to be able to just draw a fun version of a character. Um, freaks and weirdos are my specialty. So like somebody's like, "Oh, draw like a beautiful Wonder Woman." It's like, oh, I mean, sure, but like that's not why you come to me. You want like the little guy that sits on Jabba the Hutt and goes,
You want Dr.
So,
Psycho and it's you.
Doctor's like, sure, yeah, like weirdos, freaks, mutants. I love it. Not the cute, sexy mutants, weird mutants, like Toxic Avenger.
This is the part where I actually plug that on November 22nd, I will have a live stream with Gene about May the Definitive Edition, which you
Oh,
lettered.
yeah, great.
Because May is sold out on a global level at this point,
Wow.
and they're
Wow.
putting out the definitive edition. And uh, I think for the people who know you as a writer and artist, they might not be aware that you letter some of Gene's stuff.
And I mean, I just wanted to look good. I don't really, it's funny because Gene is such a generous and kind person that every time he like promotes it, he'll tag me and he'll be like, and lettered by Zander Cannon. It's like, that I'm not a letterer, so it doesn't really matter to me. I appreciate that he does it because other people are letterers and they want to be credited. And so yeah, I'm of two minds about it. I'm just sort of like, don't worry about it, but yes, worry about it. Like
Oh,
yeah,
I do think that
you
lettering
should
a book,
always credit letterers and always credit colorists and stuff. So
I do think lettering a book makes you a letterer.
absolutely, well, yes, right, you're right. You're right. Actually, you know what? That does check out logic wise. Yeah.
What else? What else are you looking forward to?
Let's see. Well, so recently I took a seminar from Tom Richmond. Do you know who he is? He used to be, well, Mad Magazine is only out every once in a great while now, but he was the guy who did for 20 years. He did the movie parodies. So he is the Mr. Caricature. And so here in Minnesota there's a place called Valley Fair, which is our sort of like theme park and roller coaster place. And he ran all of those caricature booths there. He ran the caricature booths at Mall of America. And he did a seminar recently where it was basically learn caricature. And so a couple friends and I took that class, and I mean, just you learn from the number one caricature artist in the world. And it was so fantastic, and it was so interesting to be like, oh yeah, I've been drawing comics I mean, professionally for over 30 years. And it's like I learned so much. I learned so much I couldn't fit it all in my brain, like just thinking about how he thinks about faces and how he thinks about eyes and how he analyzes somebody. Because we did things where we would draw like and have all the time in the world, and then we would also do things where we were doing live caricatures with somebody in front of us, and having to do it without really sketching it out. You kind of had to just kind of picture get the shape of their head in into your mind, and then kind of draw it starting at the eyebrows or whatever, and just kind of working your way down. And yeah, I mean, I learned so much, and I also, I realized, wow, I'm not great at caricature. Like, I mean, if somebody's pretty funny looking, yeah, I can do it. But like, but if somebody's like, where you're just sort of like, oh, this person's just sort of like this handsome looking person, and you're like, I don't know, there's nothing to really grab onto here, like, can't you have like a big nose or something?
No, yeah, that's true because Tom Richmond's art is in fact like he could take somebody like legitimately good looking, like say Brad Pitt, and I
Yeah.
would know that caricature is Brad Pitt.
Oh, yeah. It would be more recognizable than a photograph of Brad Pitt.
Right.
Like it's like hyper recognizable. And I mean, and he talked about things about like sometimes you can do a caricature without even showing their face. And he showed like a Slash from Guns N' Roses, or it's like the hat and the hair and and the guitar and the cigarette and he's like, those are all things that you can do around a facial caricature that that really helps to sell it, and not to mention sort of, like if you're going to draw Clint Eastwood, you're not going to draw his eyes wide open, or you're going to make sure that you draw him sort of with that stone face of Outlaw Josie Wales or whatever. And uh, I thought that I mean, it was like it was a master class. It was a master class. Like um, it just was so fascinating. And I mean, like then he does a caricature of everyone in the class and he sends you a print of it, and it's like that's worth the price of admission right there. Like,
Absolutely.
I know it's like
Absolutely. That's great. How fast did he take?
he actually had to take a little bit of extra time to do that character to do the character of the whole class because I think Mad sort of like dropped a deadline on him like right at the time
Oh,
that we were
okay.
doing the thing. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, we just got it the other day, and I was like, "Yep, that's me, all right." Like that looks more like me than a picture of me looks like me. So yeah,
Xander, I'm really looking forward to sleep. This has been such a pleasure as always.
absolutely, as always. Yeah, I look forward to it every year.
Yeah. Well, same time next year.
Absolutely, I'll be here.
Thank you so much. Everybody, check out Zander Cannon stuff. I'll put up some links down below. And again, really looking forward to Sleep coming from Image Comics.
Yeah.
When next year?
Uh, March-ish. It's not. It hasn't been solicited yet, so
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I blanket the airwaves.
Thank you, Xander.